Yes, sir. Welcome to another episode of the 116 Life right here on Holy Culture Radio, Sirius XM Channel 140. Listen, let's start the year off with some affirmations. We love you. Let's go ahead and start right there. We love you. Thank y'all so much for tuning in once again. As y'all know, it's a new year, but we got I got my same co-host with me. I got Ace Harris right here.
What's
How you
up?
feeling, Ace?
I'm good. Just ready to get to 2024. You know, sometimes you reset and you like do these like resolutions and all that stuff.
Yeah. Are you a resolutions person?
I'm more of a run the day, and that makes a great year.
No,
so I just try to manage my days. You know what I'm saying?
But listen, I feel like we got to go ahead and start this show with our special guest.
For sure.
You know, I feel like he's an amazing story. Well, I feel like he is an amazing storyteller, filmmaker, writer, and we got him here on the 116 Life. Welcome, Rich Perez, to the show.
What up?
Rich,
Man,
how you feeling, man?
An incredible radio voice.
Yo.
Like
me is the truth.
Yeah, you and one.
Thank you,
girl.
man. Thank you, bro.
You got an
that means a
incredible
lot.
voice.
Listen, we're so happy to have you, man. I really mean that wholeheartedly. Happy New Year. What are you most excited for 2024?
Oh gosh, so much. I think Happy New Year to both of y'all. I'm really thankful to be here. There's a lot to be excited. I'm here. I'm here. I've got my family healthy. We're in a new season of life. Being able to enjoy parenting with my teenager. Mm-hmm. I think I'm excited about family. I deeply love my unit. I love my tribe. That's what we call ourselves on the group chat. And I think that there is something deeply special about getting to parent my teen. So I'm excited about that in 2024. Just a new season of parenting. He's a sophomore in high school, helping him think about his future, his present, but also some really dope creative endeavors. I'm excited about.
That's super dope, man. I feel like I've definitely like known you for about 3 or 4 years, but I feel like definitely every time I meet you, man, it's always pleasant. You always kill. You're always fresh.
Always.
For those who can't, I know we're on the radio right now, but when you guys get the YouTube link, you got to check it out. I mean,
for sure.
I appreciate
the kids.
it,
but so speaking of that, like you're someone who's very much into like you're cut from hip hop. I feel like you're New York, fashionable. You're fresh. You're a man of faith. How does it feel? Because I saw a clip from Will Smith talking with his son about the Watch the Throne album, and like this is marriage of like when millennial dads, not to age us, but like when fatherhood and sons who like are into culture, into hip hop can find this meeting space. How does it feel to like be someone who is like into fashion, into faith, into hip hop, have a teenage son? How does it feel relating to him versus like when you were probably growing up?
Oh, it feels fantastic because, we say this all the time about parenting. One of the things that perhaps our parents didn't do as well for one reason or another was determine when they had to start fading in friendship into the friendship dynamic into relationship of parenting. Because I have a dad now who I love, has done incredible things to impact me in the way that I live today. But he didn't really know, nor did he have the tools to figure out that at some point he was going to have to be my friend. Because he wasn't going to always have to parent me. Like he'll call me now and we'll talk and he'll try to do parenting things. I'm like, Dad, I'm 40. Like you don't gotta parent me, dog. Like we could just talk baseball. We could just talk casually and be friends. And so I say that to say I get excited about this particular season of parenting. You talk about hip hop. I love music. Not just hip hop, but really music in general.
Sure, yeah.
Like
not the typecast.
No, not at all. I mean, I am from New York. Yeah. I do love hip hop.
Everybody from New York can literally play basketball and rap. It's just kind of, it's just part of the.
It comes with it. It comes with the Timbs and the bacon and
cheese. It's the starter kit for all New York City babies. But like into music, into fashion, into culture, into pop culture in particular, like. All things that my son really enjoys, I get the opportunity to use those things at this stage of his life as a 15-year-old to say, let me fade in some friendship dynamics here because I know the time will come, perhaps sooner than later, where I won't need to parent him and then I won't have anything to relate with him on because he won't need my direction in the way that he did when he was 7 or 10 or 13. So I use things like hip hop, I use things like sports, I use things like pop culture as a medium to build deeper connection with my son which will in turn give birth to a really dope friendship that, we're not just raising kids, we're raising friends in some ways. So
That's
I
amazing.
think,
That's so
that's
real.
exciting.
Only because you just that relationship, that parent child relationship is so important. You know what I'm saying? Because once they get older, I remember my dad told me on Father's Day, he was like, "I'm no longer your dad." I was like, "Well, what are we celebrating here?" But it's the fact that he raised me to a point. So now that we're able to bond on different things. So that's so important that you see it long haul. You know what I'm saying? You see it 4 years, years ahead of where you want to be with your son.
Well, my wife said something recently. So I'll say this, and we can tap into this later if y'all see that it's important.
No, it's all you.
My wife and I just started recording a podcast where we talk a lot about our parenting experiences, but also our marital experiences. And one of the things that she said recently was, "I wish we had a better philosophy of change." And what she would go on to describe is something that you just mentioned, Meah, like, we don't know how to view ourselves as ever evolving people.
That's real.
That different seasons of life will cause us to change in certain ways and thus change the way that we relate to the world, including the relationships that we have. And I think your dad saying, "Yo, I'm no longer your father," wasn't him saying, "I'm not your father." What he's saying in many ways is, there's a new way that you can relate to me now which is friend.
Right.
Like, you don't need me to do the things that necessarily a father does for a child when they're young and incredibly dependent. Now, I'm the father that feels more like a friend who serves as a sage, wise friend. Older for sure, but still a friend. And I think that is the season that my wife and I are in now, realizing that with this philosophy of change, we won't always be needed by our kids the way that they need us now. So we have to figure out a way to relate to them outside of what they need from us.
That's amazing.
So it's exciting to hear what you're saying about your dad, because I feel like that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, I feel like, listen, let us know when the book comes out, Rich, at this point, because you're dropping gems in the podcast here. But listen, you said something that I thought was so important, which we can go ahead and dive into your filmmaking and your creative storytelling, because you talked about being submerged in culture and being from New York, loving music. I want to know, when did your passion for storytelling start kick off for you?
Oh my gosh. So I think there's this philosopher that says life is lived forward but understood backward. I say that to say,
I had to pause. I just had
for real.
Let that sit just for a little bit, my G. I had to. That's great. That's super great.
Soren Kierkegaard is the one who said it. He said, "Life is lived forward but understood backward." And you asking me this question, I probably would have answered it very differently a few years ago. But being in Atlanta for the last 3 years, 3 years removed from being a pastor for almost 2 decades, I realized that these 3 years in Atlanta gave me a lot of time for reflection in order to give the best answer to this, or at least the answer that I think is best. I feel as though storytelling has been woven into everything that I've done since a child. Even while I was pastoring, even while I was working in nonprofit, even while I was traveling and doing music and theater. I think for me, if I can identify a significant moment, maybe not the first moment, but a significant moment was when I was about 19, when I joined this group called Truce, where I met Andy, and my buddy Alex Medina, who I'd been friends with at that point for about a decade. He and I joined this group where we were a traveling music and theater group.
What?
Whoa.
Yo.
We gotta dive in that a little bit. That sounds so, because I'm not gonna lie, you said Truth, I thought you were gonna say rap group.
Yeah,
or
I
R&B
was
group or
definitely
something.
hearing.
I've never,
No.
but so
I'm
talk about that.
surprised Andy ain't talking about
So you
that.
said-
Andy likes to keep some of the Sea Light stuff
Okay.
under wraps. And
This was even before Sea Light.
We're gonna pull it all out. I mean, every now and then in the group chat, a little throwback picture comes up, and Andy's just like, "Yo, don't ever put this out into the world." But yeah, continue.
So, Alex Medina and I were at City College of New York. Alex was studying music. I was studying film. And in our junior, well, I was a senior, Alex was a junior, Andy was a freshman. We met Andy. We joined this group through a brother named David Ham, who actually used to be Andy's old manager. I mean, this was a long time ago.
Wow.
I mean, I was 18, 19. I'll be 40 next month. So this was a while back. And so we joined this group, and we essentially did hip hop and theater, street theater. And so we would go to, the toughest inner cities of both this country and internationally. I remember we went to Reading, Washington. We went to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Of course, all the parts of New York City. We went to London and spent about a month and a half there doing music.
London?
Yeah, we went to London.
Who was financing? What?
So Truth.
Yo, y'all had the investment bag,
No,
yo.
I'm thinking y'all went around the city, y'all went around campus, y'all went around the world, basically.
And so this was essentially a offshoot ministry of Nicky Cruz Outreach. Nicky Cruz was a 1950 New York City gang leader, turned Christian by David Wilkerson, presented the gospel to him. He radically changed his life.
As in Rich Wilkerson?
Well, I don't know if Rich Wilkerson is related to him, but David Wilkerson started Times Square Church in New York.
Okay.
Long story, Nicky Cruz started Teen Challenge, which is a rehabilitation center for ex-gang members.
Right.
And then he started, many decades later, this music group that David Ham became the executive director. And it's essentially a group of it was essentially like a group of 13 to 15 New York City teenagers that were musicians, rappers, and actors. And we essentially made music, wrote our own screenplays, and did theater on the street. And the biggest project we did was in London for about a month and a half, where we lived out there and we did street theater in what they called estates at that time in East London, which is kind of like our projects.
Gotcha.
And we would set up a fake floor, a crazy sound system.
This is amazing.
And Alex would essentially play his beats. Me, Andy, and this brother named Keith, Lord rest his soul, would just freestyle until we gathered a crowd. And then when the crowd gathered, sometimes it was like 500 people just gathered in the streets. We would do 3 of our original songs. And then at the very end, one of us would present the gospel and invite people to faith.
Wow. Yeah.
And we did that. I did that from the time I was 19 to 26. So we did that for a couple years, and it was probably the most formative time of my life, and perhaps the time that most shaped in me my love for proclamation and theater. Like the artistic expression of proclamation, which is what would ultimately influence my love for preaching, teaching. But I always understood my preaching and teaching as a form of storytelling.
That's good.
As a form of theater. I think that theater is really important to proclamation.
Yeah.
So
some people have a wrestle with that word. I ain't gonna lie. When you was talking about the Truth Group, all I could think of was Sister Act 2. You know what I'm saying? Like this.
Oh, Sister Act 2.
I think that is just like,
or like a Mickey Mouse Club type joint.
a little cooler though. Look, Sister Act 2 was kind of
cooler.
Sister Act 2 was kind of a vibe.
Yeah.
It was out there. You know what I'm saying? It was
I
like
agree.
colorful and youthful, but I just feel like that's so
unique.
It says so much about you.
Yeah.
I'm understanding you in real time. Like, oh, this makes sense. This is who Rich is. You was out here proclaiming the gospel in theater and art and hip hop, literally all around the world, which informs so many things about what you're doing
so
now.
Much,
you know what I'm saying?
So much, dog.
That's super good.
Yeah. It was one of the most formative times of my life, for sure.
I would love to, on the next segment, just get back into what went on next in your life, because I feel like, you getting into pastoring, and it seems like the last 20 years has been a different route in terms of how you proclaimed and how you lived that
absolutely.
out. But let's definitely stay right back on the 116 Life, Holy Culture Radio, Sirius Channel 140. I got the amazing, the incredible, the fashionable, the faithful Rich Perez in the building. Meah, how you feeling?
Listen, I'm feeling good. We're going to dive more into Rich's life right here on the 116 Life. We'll be right back. And we're back right here on the 116 Live here on Holy Culture Radio, Sirius XM Channel 140. I got my co-host here, Ace Harris, and we have our special guest, Rich Perez here. Listen, we're talking about a lot of things, talking about truce. Now, we were talking off camera, we're talking about how we kind of want to go into how truce, where things went for you after that. So after that, that part of your life happened, like where did you go? Like what did you go into? I know you went into ministry after. Does that happen right after truce?
It does. So actually, there's a lot of overlap, a few years of overlap. So I joined that group when I was 18. I got married when I was 23 in 2007, and my wife and I immediately moved to upstate New York to Bible school to be there for 3 years. So from the time that I was 23 to the time that I was about 26, I was still doing truce whenever they did shows near me, and whenever I could travel. I mean, we also had a baby. So I started as the older statesman of the group, started to kind of peel off a little bit. But we moved upstate New York because we knew we wanted to go to Bible school, because ultimately I wanted to plant a church. And that came from, as I mentioned, my love for theater, my love for, it's so funny talking about what made you want to go into pastoral ministry.
Yeah.
What was your call? And I say, I loved theater and I loved proclamation, because oftentimes people talk about the call to the pastorate like this mythical thing, like a word dropped into your soul. And that does kind of play a part in it, but it was also really practical for me. Like I loved being a leader. I played college basketball, so I was also kind of like a floor general. The idea of leadership came very natural to me. I was also doing hip hop and leading in this group, being in front of people. So my love for like hip hop, proclamation, being a basketball player, my love for innovation, my love for novelty, my love for theater, all of that actually fed my love for pastoring, because I saw so much of pastoring as all of those things.
For sure.
And so I did that for 3 years. My wife and I came back in 2009, 2010, and we started the church. And we led that church for about 10 years, up until 2020 when we transitioned here to New York, to Atlanta. But those years in church planning and in pastoring, I used so many of the skills that being in those moments of leadership with truce, and again, my love for creativity, my love for novelty. I felt as though I loved what my immigrant church did for me spiritually. I grew up in a Spanish-speaking immigrant church in the heart of Washington Heights, which is northern Manhattan, New York City, where Alex and I were spiritually shaped. I loved everything they did for me. But I think that they were talking to my parents more than they were to me. I think that they were talking to the immigrant, and I wasn't an immigrant.
Sure.
I was
first generation.
Yeah, I was first generation here. And while Spanish is my first language, I feel very connected to my parents' culture and my culture. I felt as though that I also owed a kind of debt to my culture, being from inner city New York, Spanglish.
I can see all the patriarchs and matriarchs of your family just rolling their eyes now.
Yeah.
I can relate a little bit because I'm first generation American.
That's right.
My dad was a pastor, and I from Liberia, so I grew up in a church that he planted was like 90% African and like 85% Liberian. So it was like that was the culture that was woven in. So like to you, I think it was like you grow up in this church and you love the Lord, you love what you're being taught and fed. And I shout out ICF Ministries, love y'all, still give, still support, y'all amazing.
Yeah,
but I also think there needs to be a conversation about how can first generation people find their own culture without abandoning the culture of the past.
That's really well said. I think that so much of what I was learning about my son, and again, life is lived forward but understood backwards. Part of what I'm realizing now is that I represented a hybrid culture, a kind of person that existed between these two worlds. And I thought that I needed to be either part of this world or that world. But what I realized later was, oh no, the middle is my world. And I could create a language here, and I could discover a language here. I could discover ethics here that honor both of these places, both my immigrant culture and also my new culture of like inner city New York world. I needed to find a way to bring those together and create a language. And that's where the church came, because I said, I love what my immigrant church did, but they don't really understand the culture of the middle. They only understand the immigrant culture. And our church was for the culture of the middle. It spoke the language, or at least we endeavored to speak the language, understand the challenges, understand the rhythms. And we were a church of hybrid people, you know, whether we were mostly Dominican American, Caribbean American, African American, Asian American. We were mostly Hispanic American, but it was the culture of the middle. And we did that for, 10 years. And it was all parts exciting and exhausting, exhilarating and traumatizing. Like it was equal parts
to all of
those things.
Yeah.
And do you feel like that experience like made you the whole, or the pursuing whole person that you are now? Like, I mean, sometimes people look, you say life is lived for and it's
understood
backwards. I think it's tough for us to live in the past, but talk about how that 10-year journey has just shaped the kind of man you are now. To, like I'm assuming, I don't want to speak for you, but you wouldn't take it away or trade it. I mean,
no, not at all. Somebody recently asked me in another podcast, like, what I felt about those 10 years, because in 2020 I made the decision with my wife to leave. I wasn't removed because of sin. I wasn't, removed because of bad stewardship or leadership. I made a conscious decision along with my wife, prayerful decision, in a good season to leave, right? And I think that context is really important, right? So that it's not misunderstood.
Sure.
But all that to say, I said to the person, I said, I loved every second of pastoring. Like I knew while I was doing it, that's what I was supposed to be doing.
That's amazing.
And so much of those 10 years, how did they shape me? Gosh, I mean, they made me a better listener. Like I feel that leaders think that their main responsibility is to lead with communication. And I think that that's a part of it. But I realize that leadership requires, first and foremost, really good listening. Because otherwise you don't have nothing to say if you don't listen well to the story of the people that you're trying to lead. And man, I was really challenged. Like I think that the people, as I tried to listen to them and lead them, they showed me a lot of myself. The congregation showed me a lot of myself, perhaps as much as they think or believe that I showed them a lot as the leader. And they made me those 10 years made me a softer person, because it made me realize how complex we are as people.
For sure.
And also how much burden we all carry, hidden burden.
Yes.
That you either worked really hard to hide, or that you are totally unaware that you carry because of a lack of tools and awareness. And I think having to navigate people through that, through shepherding and teaching and listening and counseling and meeting with this person here, meeting with that person there, meeting with this group here, thinking about what they need to hear me preach, thinking about what they need to hear me lead. I just became an incredibly empathic person, because life is hard, people are complex, and we need to be kind in our leadership. It's just hard.
It's so good.
Especially the listening part. Like that was so key. I grew up in a mega church, so I wasn't, there was like, and also even like with my youth ministry I was a part of, there were like thousands of other, youth and things like that. So nothing against anything like that, but sometimes you get a chance to get lost.
It's a challenge.
And so now I'm in a church that's more local, and like the pastor going out talking to people, asking me, like looking me in my eye, asking me how I'm doing, like things like that, like the listening part. You said that just really resonated with me, because I feel like it's so important to listen to people. And pastors carry such important roles, and even heavy roles, because y'all connect to people. You know what I'm saying? So the role of listening, something as simple as listening, is so important. So I'm happy that you spoke to that. So I'm curious to what that transition was like for you, transitioning from 10 years of ministry into then going into the storytelling and filmmaking. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough, first and foremost, because I was leaving something that I loved. I loved pastoring. I loved shepherding. I mean, there were aspects about being a pastor that I didn't enjoy, but I loved being in that role. And so it was difficult making the decision to transition out of that. However, I have an incredibly supportive tribe, both in my family, but also my friends who I consider family, and also just my family as well. Everyone was very supportive. Everyone was very eager to help me process the transition, which I think was really key, because left to myself, I wouldn't have had perspective about what I was doing. But aside from it being difficult, leaving something that I love, it was also exciting.
I can kind of just see that. I see that energy around you when I've come around you. It's like, I mean, similarly to one of our good friends, John. I mean, you guys are, pastors for so many years.
During our young years, too.
But I just see like a new era for both of y'all. That's like, it gives me life. It's like these dudes
for sure
are invigorated and excited to use what God has given them. And I think it also releases some of the pressure of Christian culture in America about like, to serve the Lord is to do this for life in this capacity.
100%.
It's like, fam, nah.
Well, John actually has a really good metaphor that he's come across in his own reflection and reading. But if pastoring, the success of pastoring is reaching the top of the mountain, we make the mistake of putting all of our energy into this role, into this call to get to the top, but we leave no energy to come back down. And so, to your point, what I realized in 2020 was we did a good thing. The Lord used us to do a good thing for 10 years. I need to leave some energy to come back down. Because the people that will feel it the most if you don't leave energy is who? Your wife and your kids.
That's good.
Your kids will be like, oh, you gave all your energy to the church. Oh, okay, I see. But my wife and I decided I was going to leave energy for the second half of life so that I could be with my kids in a more intentional way. I thought I did that well while I was pastoring, but now I'm like, I'm all in. I'm helping myself to think about what it means to love my kids. In this season of life, I'm all in into helping my son think about his teenage years, thinking about college in 2 years. Like, I have time to do that. I don't have a meeting to go to. I don't have a leadership meeting. I don't have a counseling session. I don't have to prepare for a sermon. Like, all great things, but that season is done. So I was also very excited about the transition and what it was going to afford me. Now, transitioning into this new vocation of filmmaking, I was incredibly excited about that because that's what I studied in college, and I thought that that's what I was going to be doing after college. And, the Lord took me in a different direction. But I'm so glad that I entered into filmmaking now.
Why is that?
I have life. I've lived life.
So good.
My stories have greater depth. I'm not and this is not an absolute by any means. Sure. But I'm not a 21-year-old kid trying to break into the film industry.
Oh wow, yeah.
I'm a 40-year-old man who has life experiences and has 2 decades of storytelling that I'm now bringing into my work. So when people, I do a lot of freelance work, so whether I get hired to do a documentary or to do just a simple brand video, what I bring that's most valuable is my taste. It's my taste and my life experiences, because I'm not just going to help you sell these shoes, or I'm not just going to help you sell this item. I'm going to help you sell yourself.
Yeah.
And to identify yourself, to identify your client's self, you have to know who you are. You have to actually be good at the skills of tearing the layers apart of the false self so that you can actually sell the product that you need to sell. And so I'm really excited about this season of filmmaking, because I want to tell stories that are true of my experience. I want to tell stories that are deep, honest, and complex so that they reflect our reality. And I also just love good storytelling, visual storytelling. So all that to say, my transition was hard. It was a little fear-inducing because you don't know how next is going to look. But it was also exciting because I was going to jump into something that I really loved.
And I'm excited to jump into the next segment, one of your short films that I had the pleasure of seeing. And I'm before I even say what I got to say.
Saw it. Thank you.
Right. So
Oh,
I'm excited to be able to dive more into that in this next segment. We'll be right back here on the 116 Live here on Holy Culture Radio, Sirius XM on channel 140. We'll be right back. And we're back right here on the 116 Live here on Holy Culture Radio, Sirius XM Channel 140. Listen, we're going to wrap up this final segment. Rich, I got to tell you this. You inspire me, man. I mean that wholeheartedly. I grew up in I grew up with a writing background, and I went to a performing arts high school, and writing was my minor, and drama was my major. And I thought that I had aspirations to go into film and things like that. So even getting the chance to see your short film, It Stays With Us, was so inspiring to me. And even like hearing you talk about how creatives like you are just so important, only because you care, you know what I'm saying? Like how you said there are bits of you, whether it's a brand deal or something that's very like, an intricate story, you put your pieces, your taste into it, and it tells something bigger than what people think. So I'm so grateful that you're here and people are able to hear your story. I want to talk about It Stays With Us, your short film. So what inspired you to make that film, tell that particular story that you did with that short film?
Well, thank you for sharing that. That means a lot to me, Meah, seriously. Grief is universal. The movie is about grief. But particularly it was inspired by my mom, who passed away in 2007, and my younger brother, who was 15 when she passed away. I don't think I've ever said this out loud anywhere, but it was inspired by my brother, because I was married when my mom passed away, and my older sister was married with children. My brother was left with my father, and he had to process that grief alone because I had moved away and my sister lived in Jersey also. But the movie is essentially about wrestling with the question, what can it look like if we gave young Black and brown boys the permission to feel sorrow? Like, what does it look like? And that was a really important story for me to tell, one, because it was personal to me and the loss that I was experiencing, but particularly to show the complexity of how human emotions, especially the emotion of sadness, is not well received when a young Black boy feels it, right? Because Black and brown boys should learn to master anger, not sadness, and I wanted to show what it looks like for a young brown boy to like wrestle with his grief even years after the loss. That's another aspect of the film, right? That grief, as our good friend John would say, doesn't expire. It's not something that ends, but rather something that lingers or something that stays with us. And you have to learn to relate to it differently. So the movie was really, the message of the movie and the telling of this story was really important. Another really cool part about it is I did this with my son. Josiah didn't do the actual writing, but he helped me to create the concept and the flow of the story. Josiah has been acting since he was about 7 years old. He's 15 now, so he's been acting for a while. And he was the lead character in the story. So even writing to production, doing that with my son, it felt like Will and Jaden a little bit. You know what I mean? Like just getting a chance to work with him in this unique way, in a way that we both love film. I mean, Josiah and I can talk about films,
Really? Like y'all
everything,
nerd out.
like everything from MCU to like art house films. Josiah and I can talk about those things for hours. Because we both love it. And so it was just not only important to tell the story, but it was also special to do it with Josiah.
Yeah, I think even thinking about the title of the film, It Stays With Us, I think that it just says so much. So I've obviously seen you speak at pulpits a couple times, and you said a couple things that stood out to me, and I want to call them out in light of the film. So you said, quote, I'm a feeler. I feel everything. And I think it's so liberating hearing like a Latino man, a brown man say that, because culture sometimes doesn't give that permission. Talk about how the art of feeling and the humanity of feeling.
The art of feeling, I like
and
that.
like how that helps liberate people to feel that, because I feel like another thing you said too on the pulpit, which I take my notes, you talked about faith through the lens of imagination.
Yeah.
And how sometimes we're trying to box faith into like these black and white silos of either this or that, when there's a mystery there that we can experience. So talk about how, I know that was a lot of questions. Talk about one, how the art of feeling and how that liberates us even as men, you know what I'm saying, versus shackling us, and how you use your imagination to like kind of unfold that.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we don't give credence to our emotions, we pretend. Because the essence of who you are is not reduced to your emotion, but it involves your emotion. So if I ever feel anything, if I ever feel sad, or if I feel grief, or if I feel pain or hurt or betrayal or happiness or pleasure, I need to occupy a space that allows me to express that feeling, whatever it is. Otherwise, I'm only encouraged to suppress it. And in doing so, I'm not true. You know what I mean? Like, I am not true if I don't express what I'm feeling. And I don't mean like, I'm going to write it on Twitter or X, or I'm going to write it. I'm not talking.
We got to talk about that.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily talking that kind of expression. I'm talking, where can you show up fully at any given moment, whether it involves grief, sadness, pain, pleasure, happiness, joy. Like, where can you show up? So the art of emotions, I love the way you put that, right? The art of emotion is that you have the permission to feel all of the things that you feel with no qualification. Like,
that's good.
I've said this in the past. Like, I think one of the areas where I think the Christian community needs work is in the art of emotions. We don't do emotions very well, because if I ever go to, in the past, whenever I've gone to a group of Christians and said, hey, I feel sad, they would say, yeah, but joy, right? Or if I were to say, hey, I have doubts, they would say, yes, but faith. There's always a qualification, almost as if doubt and faith can't coexist, or almost as if sadness and joy can't coexist. Like, no. They're two sides of the same emotion, right? They're related to one another. So I think I find a lot of liberation when I am in relationships or among people that aren't intimidated by my feelings.
That's good.
And that they allow me to show up fully. And then in showing up, I can begin to observe and examine and analyze, is this feeling helping me or is it harming me? But if I don't even have the permission to show it, then how could I ever discover if it's trying to serve me? I also think that our emotions are kind of like codes that God uses to tell us things.
That's good.
You know what I'm saying? Like, God, we over spiritualize the way that God talks to us. We say, well, you got to read your Bible, which is true. You read your Bible, that's God's word. You got to pray hard. You got to really concentrate. I'm like, what if I just allowed myself to feel and just evaluated and interrogated my feelings? Could I hear God through my feelings? And I believe you can,
Could I hear God through my feelings?
Could I hear God through my
That's
feelings?
Great.
And I believe you can. Psalm 51 verse 6 says, you desire integrity in my inner self. You teach me wisdom deep within. God wants to establish us with integrity in the inner self, which involves our thoughts and our feelings. And he wants to teach us wisdom deep within. Okay. So I have to make room to interrogate what's happening inside, which includes my feelings and my thoughts.
Because I think what you're leading to is like those feelings being a feel. Even in the film, it stays with us.
Yes,
That's right.
Yes,
That's
and
right.
so you're kind of advocating like it stays with us, but don't keep it in. Like let it out, express it, and find places where
and
you
interrogate it, like examine it, like say, yo, what God, what are you trying to say to me through this sadness? What are you trying to say through me through this anger? What are you trying to say to me through this pleasure? You know, like God uses our feelings. And so I think that the art of emotion, learning how to both embrace, give permission to expression, and interrogating emotion actually leads you to God. And I think that we should do that more often. I mean, I vaguely remember the second question around imagination. Yeah, imagination. Oh gosh. I mean, I told my kids one time last year, you know, we were doing like family reflection, and I said, yo, let's do an exercise together, all of us. My wife, my kids. I said, let's describe faith without using the word faith. I said, let's just try to see what we mean. And, you know, we said a whole bunch of things. And ultimately what we landed on was, okay, if I couldn't use the word faith, then the way that I would describe it is vulnerability, trust, and imagination. All those three elements, I believe, make up what faith actually is. If I had to describe it, I had to say, well, faith involves a level of vulnerability because you have to trust, right? You have to be vulnerable enough to say, is there another way to understand my life and this life outside of my perspective? I've got to be vulnerable enough to say, I may not fully get it. But then you have to trust that God does, and that what he's offering you, whether it's through his word or through a word that comes from a prophet, you have to trust that that perspective is trustworthy. And then you have to employ imagination to say, what can my life look like if I believed this? So imagination.
That's good. The picture's being painted, y'all.
Good,
imagination is so important to faith.
Oh, wow.
Because I told my kids this. This was when they were very young. I said to my son, actually my daughter wasn't even born. I said to my son when he was about 4, I said, yo, Papi, draw a picture of a pig flying. And, you know, after a few moments, he was just having a hard time. He's like, I don't know what to do, Papi, you know. And I said, go ahead, give it another try. And then he came back and he drew something that looked like a pig with wings on it, essentially. And then we would later have this 4-year-old conversation. I said, yo, if I can't imagine what a pig looks like flying, how could I ever imagine a world where there's no tears, no pain, no death? I said, I have to employ the imagination of the kingdom to imagine. God tells me that a world is coming where there is no pain, no tears, no death. I said, I can't imagine that now because all we see is pain, tear, and death. Right. So how else could I even think of what this world is like if I don't employ divine imagination? I have to. So good. And Jesus helps me with language, both in scripture and through people.
Yeah, I'm just sitting in the moment for a second.
I'm just sitting. A Selah moment after that. Rich, I feel like you have so much inside of you, and it shows. It genuinely shows.
Yeah, for sure.
From your social media, storytelling just on your social media, and then through your films, through culture, through faith, like it just all comes out, even with us just talking now. I feel like you have a lot to even say when it even comes to those aspiring storytellers and filmmakers, because sometimes we're so, I mean this in love, please hear my heart. sometimes it can be kind of shallow with like the faith side.
Yeah.
And
You're so nice.
I mean that wholeheartedly. And I feel like we have stories to tell, man. And all stories aren't like you were saying, joy, happiness. Like sometimes it's grief, sometimes it's sadness and things like that. Vulnerability, and takes imagination and things of that nature. What would you to aspiring storytellers, even just storytellers in general, how could they improve their storytelling? How could they be better filmmakers, better writers, so on and so forth?
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, so much could be said. I'll say a few. The first, don't rush through the life that will actually give you the substance and the tools to be a good storyteller. Like, whether younger or just impatient creators will want to just go create. And there is value to going and creating for sure, because there's a lot of tactile learning, right? You learn from experience in large part. But also, don't forget to live. Like, don't forget to live life. Live life, because that's what's going to give you the fuel to create. You know, you mentioned shallow, you know, the shallow of the pieces that you may see, the shallowness of the pieces that you may see. Well, that's because people are not giving time to the thing that comes before creating, which is living. Like, you need to live. The other thing I would say is pay attention as you live. Pay attention to yourself. Look deeply within. Ask questions. Do the work of not necessarily becoming healthy, because I think good art comes even as you are getting healthy. In fact, I think the best art comes from as you're getting healthy. But don't short circuit the work. Do the work of self-interrogation. Do the work of emotional interrogation of yourself and of the world around you. Make time to be compassionate. Make time to be empathetic. Because what good stories exist that don't involve human experience? But how can you get human experience if you aren't making the time to live with people and to be vigilant about how they interact with you and the world, and how you interact with others and the world? And so I would say, if you're a creator, filmmaker, writer, storyteller, content creator, don't forget to live. Don't forget to live, because that's what's going to give you the substance and the fuel to actually create meaningful things.
That's so important.
Shout out RG with the song.
Nah, I thought the same thing.
Yeah.
Rich, thank you so much for being here, man.
Oh,
you dropped so
my
many
gosh.
gems, and you had added so much value with our conversation. Let everyone know how they can follow you and they can stay in contact with everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the best way is through social media. Rich Perez. I'll probably be the first person on that list, just because there might not be a lot of Rich Perez's. But at Rich Perez on Instagram. Look out, in the next few weeks, my wife and I are dropping a podcast called Becoming Ourselves. And so that's going to be a really dope time. So
that's so dope, man. Thank you again for being here, Rich.
Absolutely, man.
Listen,
thank y'all for letting me be here, man.
Absolutely.
This was great.
We're so happy that you were able to be here and share. And shout out to everyone that was tuning in. We hope that you guys got something out of this episode, left here inspired. And yeah, man, we're just so grateful the fact that we're able to cultivate these conversations for you guys to be able to enjoy. So as always, I'm Meah Evans signing off. And also, I got Ace Harris here with me as well. Listen, we'll see you guys next time here on the 116 Live here on Holy Culture Radio, Sirius XM Channel 140. We'll see you next week.